Welcome, everyone. This is yet another episode of Disruption Talks. And today, I'm going to start with a little personal story because the guest I've actually known for over a year now. Back in 2020, January, just before the world turned upside down, Frederic and I are today's guests. We were at Davos, and Frederic was hosting a panel, co-hosting a panel on elegant exits in philanthropy from the perspective of MAVA Foundation, which you will hear about soon. And shortly after the panel, I actually approached Frederic, and he was kind enough to, despite me and my friend being 23, 24 at the time, spending actually a good 30, 50 minutes talking just to us, even though there was a line of people just as curious as us to talk to Frederic. So it's no surprise that right now, with Frederic having a new venture and reaching out, as we all do, via LinkedIn to refresh the contacts whilst everybody's forcibly staying at home, we refreshed our contact as well. And joining us today is Frederic Hoffmann, the Chief Development Officer of Project X Global. Welcome, Frederic. Great to have you.
Hi, Philip. Thanks again. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a blast. So what we usually start with is the personal prism, the company prism, the industry prism. So the personal one, a short introduction. I gave them a very brief one. If you could give the proper one.
Sure thing. Well, I guess our relationship, so to speak, started about a year and a bit ago at Davos, and it was a fun time to meet because, of course, it was at the brink of a new world, which we didn't see coming. We didn't expect it, I think, in a strange way. We all had this feeling, but yeah. And it was also, I guess, personally kind of a turning point in a different step in my career, and we were talking about this earlier on. So I guess the short story is my background's environmental policy. I'm very interested in how systems can be put to service or can be leveraged for the shift that we need towards sustainability at a global level, and recognizing how that is a system of many moving parts. And I spent a few years in the sort of few years before in venture capital, working specifically in the food and agricultural value chains, because I find that's a really exciting space where the environment and people and economies come together and meet, and it's a really tangible place in which you can discuss the benefits of healthy ecosystems and really see economic returns on them too, which makes it obviously a commercial discussion, which then brings you into a much wider field of possibilities. So it's a fun field to be in. And since a year or so, I've joined Project X, which is a sustainability accelerator, which I guess we'll talk quite a lot about later on today, which we're really diving into this idea of how can you leverage value chains to adopt on a large scale sustainable solutions or sustainable alternatives, which may be out there but just are locked out of scale. And it's an exciting way to be supporting innovation in a way that is not just monetary, as you might see in a venture capital fund, but is actually more holistic. So yeah, excited to be here, excited to discuss it.
I'm going to press you on that one more because it sounds even slightly too good to be true when we manage to not address the results, but address the cause of certain things, just like Project X deals with issues at the source so they don't create second order, third order effects. And I'm really keen to hear how that's going and how corporations are reacting to that. But first, a personal question. The transition period, not only between us leaving Davos and just as I was boarding the plane, I got the Twitter notification from Zero Hedge that first cases in Zurich noticed. So that was an Indiana Jones moment. But also that transition and the transition between MAVA Foundation and Project X Global. What was that like?
So I'm still just as active at the MAVA Foundation as I was back
then.
Okay. So I'm still working, as a trustee, supporting them in their work. And so formerly I was more full-time on this venture capital fund. And actually, no, but what's I hope something that many other people have been able to experience was suddenly, as we kind of all turned indoors, the line between what's professional and what's private was blurred. And that obviously was quite traumatic in many ways, but it was also very exciting in the sense that it allowed me personally to merge these worlds. And what we're doing at Project X is very similar to what we're doing at the Venture Fund, and it's actually very similar to what we're doing at the MAVA Foundation, which is engaging people, engaging passionate, intelligent entrepreneurs to work within systems and to work within, I'd say, in a humble way, realizing that they're only one small element of a solution and pushing together forward. And so there's some very tangible similarities between each role and each, I think, not necessarily job description role, but each sort of role within society. And I think that is to figure out when people can work together and how you can multiply the benefits in a fair and equal way.
Okay. So since it's not that different from each other, still, I want to know, what does a day in the life of a chief development officer look like?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, it's a lot of Zoom, like for most people, I think, in this industry. It's about figuring out really how do we expand beyond our current reach. So we do a lot of work with my colleagues about questioning, why are we doing this? What are we doing forward? What are we doing that's different? It's very important. My colleague and founder of the company, she likes to say, what's in your self-interest? So try to understand, why do people act? Why do people want to join into a systems change? And that really helps you move forward in a more decisive way. Maybe one brief anecdote. Some of you might have seen this recent documentary, Seaspiracy, which gave a very radical view of a problem which is clear. We can all agree that there is massive issues to be addressed within the fish value chain, but we can also agree that a lot of these interviews were very one-sided. And so the reason I bring this up is that perhaps that will shock people, and people will give up fish, but I'd wager that a large majority of them will go back to eating fish within a few months. And then that long-term effect that was desired might not take seed. Whereas the way we try to look at it is to say, well, how do we engage people for them to act in the long term and think in the long term? And, you have to feel some tangible benefits to yourself as you buy into systems change. I think that's really key for, especially when we're looking at environmentalism, which might be quite distant from a lot of the stakeholders that we work with in terms of them sitting in desk jobs and it being sort of second or third order effects, but actually feeling engaged and feeling why you want to act does, I think, really help us with this transition. So a lot of my job is about personalizing, understanding, empathizing why people are doing this, and then trying to build systems in which the incentives are aligned around moving towards a sustainable, holistic view of systems. And so what's exciting is that we do this in the procurement value chain. So it's not a consumer-facing industry. It's not somewhere where we say, stop using plastic straws. We obviously should not use plastic straws, but it's kind of behind the scenes. And so you're very rapidly talking about much larger quantities and much fewer stakeholders. So that's one thing I'm really excited about this role and about what we're doing in Project X, is that we're, in a way, finding acupuncture points behind what the consumer sees, where we can help bring solutions that benefit everybody. And it's very important that they benefit everybody, from the producer to the consumer and everybody on the value chain along the way, in this transition to sustainability.
Drawing on that acupuncture metaphor, that's one thing I'm warning you. I'm going to be slightly critical and questioning, because my initial approach is that at the end of the day, especially for corporations, the bigger they are, it's difficult, if not almost impossible, to align the two interests that you just mentioned, being their original interests and the interests that we are trying to address here. Prove me wrong. I'm open to being proved wrong. But first, let's frame it a little bit for the audience. Corporate accelerator with a non-corporate twist, because you're not trying to, let's give this a boost to make more money. You're actually saying, let's give this a boost so it causes less damage. What are the 10 most environment heavy value chains, the ones that you're trying to approach? And if not the 10, then like the biggest criminals in that regard.
So our company was founded as a spin-off from the WWF, but it's a private company. It's a B Corp, actually. like you, which means that we are, aligned in our values, and we recognise that we're part of a community of stakeholders rather than a community of shareholders, which makes a big difference, I think, in the mental shift. But I think we'll talk about that maybe a bit later. And so when we spun out, we created a report which we've called the 10 in 10, which is sort of our theory of change. It's what we see as being the way in which our contribution to society can be maximized. Basically, 10 in 10 stands for the 10 industry value chains that need to shift over the next 10 years. So it was a qualitative and a quantitative study, which was done in 2018 with a few different partners, which I can talk about later. And basically, it singled out the value chains that had the most impactful, on one hand, the most impactful existence, and on the other hand, the highest likelihood to generate change at scale if they were to shift. And so top of that list is clearly food and beverage, and that's where we've started our work. Then it quite quickly goes, so we've got food and beverage, construction, animal protein, textiles, and then utilities and crop production, and until we get down to transport at the bottom of those top 10. So that's really our theory, is that we should be focusing on shifting the value chains of these. And just a couple more points maybe about this. What's interesting in these is, so those 10 industries represent 40% of global economic output. That's 40% of the global GDP. There's been some quite conclusive studies that suggest that if you manage to shift 10% of procurement, you then create positive feedback loops, which allow the rest of the value chain, so that 90 extra percent, to kind of naturally fall into that cycle, be it through economies of scale, or through better understanding of the technologies, or through better consumer acceptance. So again, coming back to acupuncture, figuring out what is the smallest bit that we can do to generate the largest change. If we shift 10% of those 10 value chains in the next 10 years, that's $1.3 trillion of spend diverted towards procurement, which is sustainable as opposed to previously unsustainable. So that's massive global systems change.
Is there a value chain or supply chain that is worth applauding as of today? Is there one that's either innately clean or one that has repaired itself?
That's a very good question. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. My gut instinct is to say we need to recognize this as a journey, so we need to recompense and congratulate the first movers. I think it's important that it's recognized that the transition towards sustainability is something that society wants. It's very important also for steps to be backed up by action. So we've seen a lot of commitments over the past few years, pretty much since the Paris Agreement, of countries saying we will decarbonize so-and-so economy, or we will decarbonize the whole economy. I'd prefer, I'm going to be very Swiss, and I'd prefer not to call out one industry which has been doing particularly well, because I think it is too early to strike the hammer. And I think maybe in the environmental world, we have been probably a bit too keen to criticize or too keen to congratulate. And so I really do actually take this stance of us, this is business as usual. This isn't sustainability. We're calling it sustainability at the moment because this is what we need. This is the kind of the goal. But we cannot be saying, I don't think that's the right way forward as a PR perspective for our industry.
Okay. That was just my curiosity. If there's one that just happens to be the least nasty, not by design, but just because so it happens circumstantially.
Yeah. I mean, that being said, I do want to say it is very important that activists do exist to call out the bad ones and to congratulate the good ones, because that does help us do our work behind. So I'm very much in favor of activism, but I think if you're working in procurement, you need to be professional.
And unbiased, of course.
Exactly.
So the pilot program, Feedex, concerning animal feed, exactly. We know that there are no names dropping. Let's keep it clean. But generally, it is a thing concerning animal feed, and it is a thing. Does that somehow border with crops or anything concerning that, or is that totally separate from?
Yeah, so our first pilot project, which we've kind of carried through our entire process, has been in aquaculture feed, so feed for fish farms, which is an area where there is significant gains to be made in terms of reduction of carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of its impact on biodiversity. Um, uh, Farmed fish is very reliant on wild caught fish protein, which is kind of crazy when you think of it, but that's just how the system has evolved. And so we're working and helping alternatives from, for example, algae or insects or biofermentation be used in this sector. You asked specifically, is there a link with crops? There absolutely is. On land, if you're referring to land-based crops, there absolutely is. One of the biggest feedstocks for fish, apart from wild-caught protein, is soy, and so there's a big demand for alternatives to soy because of the links between soy and deforestation in the Amazon in particular. Again, to come back to this concept of systems, what we're doing is not saying we need to get rid of everything and replace it by one solution. What we're doing is we're bringing in different alternatives and step by step growing them into the value chains, because we're again conscious that this will not stick if it's not at least good business. It needs to be profitable, or it needs to be equal to or better than business as usual from an economics perspective. And of course, many of these alternative producers are young, innovative companies who aren't used to producing 100 tons of weekly production. So we're also there to help them grow into that space by securing buy-in from the market. So there is an impact. We're by pushing these alternatives and by bringing sort of scientifically vetted, independent alternatives into the space, we are displacing problematic monocultures.
Okay. So how did Feedex perform as a pilot program? Like, did it surely justified the following programs, on which I want to ask you in a moment, if there's anything that you can reveal. But speaking on Feedex, how did that go?
Yeah, so Feedex, we're currently in what we're calling stage 5 test. So maybe I'll walk you through our system briefly, because it's quite unique approach to systems innovation. And the idea is that there are 5 steps of de-risking, and then 5 steps of maximizing, or 4 steps of maximizing impact, sorry. And so in the de-risking steps, what we do is we walk through basically identifying a problem. So we didn't just say feed is where we need to be. We said, okay, we know that our high-level study showed us that food and beverage is a problematic sector. What within there is especially problematic? And so we'll dive deeper and deeper, and we'll do this with consultation with experts and with consultants and with industries to kind of peel back the layers. We get to a stage which we call category de-risking, which is, okay, we know there's something in feed, but what's the problem? Is it, what the nets are made of? Is it the species that we're cultivating? Is it the areas? Or is it actually the feed? So in this case, we concluded that it's the presence of wild-caught protein and soy within the feed, which is the problem. That's what we're trying to displace. And so then we work with large corporates who are actually the ones who, in a way, are the wind in our sails, because what we'll do is we'll negotiate an agreement to purchase from a corporate or from a large buyer, which will say, you need to perform this on palatability, this on digestibility, this on cost, this on availability, and if you manage that, we'll pay you X. And so with that, we can then go out and find these innovators, and that brings us to stage, so that's search and select to find the innovators, and then that brings us to stage 5, which is our testing phase, which is really crucial. So that's what we're in at the moment. So we have currently a handful of innovators who are working directly with our major corporate partner, who are basically testing in the commercial setting their products. And this is where they get their first income from the buyer. And this is also kind of the critical moment. So we've seen some very promising results. We're hoping to move on to scaling phases very shortly. The reason I've walked through every one of those steps is to illustrate the fact that core to our activity is reducing risk, making it very difficult to say no, making it basically a no-brainer to adopt a sustainable alternative. So we come into these testing phases with a lot of confidence that everybody engaged is there because they actually want to see a positive outcome. It's not a question of saying, oh, we'll do a little test, but we're not really interested. It's there is too much to lose if you don't go forward. So that's very exciting to be at this stage, and we're really at the bottom of this amplifying machine where we're really excited to be accompanying our innovators along this journey.
Yeah, sorry, go.
No, so success, but not finished.
Okay, so major congrats and fingers crossed for the future of that. And I was just about to ask you the 6 lens de-risking, and I guess that's what you just served me. So was that it exactly?
Well, so we have many processes, I guess. We have our 9-step scaling, which is what I just discussed, and then our 6 lens is just to say the approach that we take when we ask these questions isn't only, so we're a systems accelerator for environmental solutions, but our 6 lens approach forces us to open up and say, okay, we look at the environmental lens, of course. We also look at nutrition in the feed case, for example, because we know that if you fail on nutrition, the whole thing collapses. So it's very important. Then, of course, at the legal and political aspects, how do we actually displace or how do we actually scale these innovators? And there are issues about regulation. What can you feed a fish that then feeds a human, which need to be considered. Then there's the economic perspective. Is this commercially viable? And finally, or not finally, because they're all equal in value, but the ethical perspective. So actually, what does it mean to feed an insect to a fish to a human? And is there something there that we need to be concerned about? Is there something in the amount of fish actually stuck in these fish farms that is concerning? So we take these all into account when we select our innovators and when we identify the problem.
That is an absolutely beautiful framework. And I'm not just saying it for the purpose of saying it. I was actually looking for a solution like that for a specific problem. And this actually is extremely helpful. So thank you.
Well, if you'd like to talk about it, we can dive into different projects very, very happily. And if anyone listening is interested, do get in touch.
That's what I wanted to ask more. What's next in line? Because your roadmap draws the 2 phases between 2017 and 2020.
Yep.
That happened. And now we've got the 10 years, the decade between 2020 and 2030. What are the plans? How much did COVID redefine them? Tell me, what's the latest?
Yeah, so really this decade is the decade of action. I think it's been called by a few other parties, which I like that term because we're in it. So let's do it. We have 10 years, or less than 10 years now, because we're in 2021, to accomplish many of the public agreements that have been made and many of the goals for decarbonisation happening in 2030, 2035. We know that this is incredibly urgent to move forward, and we have these 10 value chains which we want to shift. So the goal is clear. It's 10 value chains in 10 years for us. So at the moment, we're working on developing our next value chain, which will very likely be focusing on topics of soil regeneration, in particular in the fashion value chain. We see there's a big opportunity there to support the transition towards more regenerative farming practices. So it's a different concept because we're applying our knowledge of systems innovation and our expertise in sourcing real alternatives, and now we're going to be applying this to this methodology to techniques, to methods, rather than just to feedstock. So we're slightly adapting the model for this next industry. So we're doing that in parallel with Feedex. So Feedex, we've spoken about aquaculture. There's also a very big interest in poultry feed. It's about 40 times bigger than aquaculture. And it's the biggest feed kind of consumer in the world. So we're kind of currently pursuing ways in which we can use process that we have for the innovators that we've worked with, how they can work now in the poultry sector. So those are kind of our thematic things. And then to support this, we're developing a couple other tools. One, which is kind of my passion project at the moment, is a green bond, which we're issuing to support the transition of each of these industries. So to bring it back actually to the beginning of our conversation about philanthropy and venture capital, each of those have a very distinct role in supporting innovation, but I'm conscious that we sit sort of between the two, and I'm very engaged at the moment in building a solution which could basically be used to fund disruptive change, fund change which will shift the systems in which we work and which will make the world a better place to live in, but not build that on an extractive model, which is a model of we make a fund makes a bet and then they get a lot of money in return. So this green bond is really built on the idea that investors become partners of the adventure. Those barriers should be lowered down as low as possible so that anyone can buy into this, and that returns reflect physical boundaries. So returns are let's call them human returns. I mean, you get your money back, but you're not going to get 10 times your money back because you need that to fund the transition towards sustainability. So this is a topic that I'm currently working on, and so we're raising £1 million to fund the Feedex bond, and then a further £10 million next year to fund the 10 value chains.
Okay, that's. Just wanted to remind everybody that if you want to ask questions, I'm not the only one allowed to ask questions here. Please post them in the comments. I see one already, but let's hold it for later. So moving on to the industry prism, the way that I met you was essentially overcoming inefficiencies of connecting the philanthropy to the need, and this is also what I wanted to talk about when you mentioned this this alignment. How do you identify a good partner? How do you I know that you mentioned all of those steps, but what is like the make or break really when you know that someone is doing this without having like the pure intention, simply with having the pure intention, without saying, okay, I will not make that much money, I see it as a trade-off, but actually, sure, we believe in this, let's go.
So do you mean partners, you mean in any one of these business?
In any one of those business, yeah.
I mean, I think let's come back to the concept of humanizing the transition. This transition towards sustainability is urgent. It needs to happen fast, but also needs to happen, or I'd say can only happen with people who believe in it and who want it to move forward. There are people who will, I think, gladly slow the system down because they don't see a direct benefit in acting fast. So maybe that's the number one criteria for me on a personal level on engagement is, I know that you believe in this as much as I do, and I know that you'll work as hard as I will to get there. I think that's very important. I'm going to contradict myself immediately and say it's incredibly important that we're not snobby about who we work with. I think it's very important to realize that everybody, every individual on earth has something to bring towards this, towards system change, towards sustainability. We need to recognize that it's a diverse and a plural sector. We need to recognize that it isn't just industries that will lead us there, and it isn't just innovators that will lead us there, but it's also the consumers. So everybody, if we're looking at the food value chain, everybody eats every day, or at least interacts with the value chain of food every day. You might be fasting, that's fine. But that you have, I guess, a direct implication into it, and not to mention the fact that food isn't only about climate change. It's actually much more linked to healthy ecosystems, nature, and biodiversity. And there, I mean, everybody breathes air at least 30 times a minute. So, we do. There is a way for everybody to feel engaged, and it's about figuring out how that happens. So we, as I guess environmental practitioners, need to be able to build that bridge.
So a side question right now, because what you mentioned about the engagement of those parties. So of course we have the parties that we hold to the higher standard as if just the corporations, like you have so much power, you have so much reach, you have so much funds to manage both the possibilities and the reach. The responsibility is on you. But what about let's say the people? Because of course it's easier to change the corporation, because if the corporation changes then the people can't make the irresponsible environmentally choices. But for example, when there's the nutritional aspect of epidemiology, and it's nothing to do with the epidemic of COVID, it's everything to do with the epidemic of diabetes and so on and so forth. uh, how much, if you can name a number percentage wise, is it, let's say, 50-50 corporations and people just starting to make the right choices, or are we putting more expectation on the corporations and just letting people be people?
I mean, I like where we're going with this debate, because we're getting to the core of the idea that this is it's a system with many different actors. You cannot blame anyone within the system, because it's a result of years of, in many cases, poor decision making, poor political decision making. Short termism, I think, has really led to us to where we are now. The epidemic of obesity. I'd even expand that to the epidemic of lack of choice in food. There's been a terrible drive to the bottom in terms of access to nutritional food at a global level. The fact that the amount of malnourishment or undernourishment is equal to the amount of obesity, or surpassed by the amount of obesity, is evidence that people have unhealthy access to food. Is it the fault of corporates alone? No, I don't think so. Do they have a role? Yes, definitely. It is a lot cheaper to use refined flours and refined sugars in baked goods, for example, and they do last a lot longer on the shelf, and that price is passed on to the consumer. So everybody, in a sense, pays less, but in the long run, they pay more. So I'm a very strong advocate. And I've probably said the word system a bit too often today, but I'm a very strong advocate of us having to take this holistic perspective on what is health. Food is an element of health. It's a socioeconomic phenomenon, the food value chain that we engage in, but it's also directly related to how our bodies evolve and our minds evolve. Governments certainly have a strong responsibility to recognize that. We've had a few really, really awful decisions made in the past, well, I guess since the industrialization of food production, but even in the very recent history, in the UK, the food policy has been awful. And luckily, we've had some very strong public voices who've managed to overturn some decisions that have been made in terms of access to food. So, yeah, I really think there's a common but differentiated responsibility among people. Yeah, and the blame game won't get us far.
Of course. I make me feel guilty when you say blame game. No. I mean, personally, I'm partial more to the interventionism aspect of all of this, because it's a little bit like a product designer designing UX. Of course, you can allow the user to walk anywhere, but if you sort of think for them in advance, chances are you're going to get a happy user. The user is going to get to where they're supposed to. Just like if you limit the access to cheap, high caloric, high fructose corn syrup foods, then the likelihood is that you're still going to want to eat something. And when the next best alternative is actually grabbing eggs and maybe bacon and just getting some scrambled eggs with bacon, that's still going to be healthier than your McWrap or McMuffin or whatever it is these days.
And so that's a really, I mean, there's a lot of value in these kind of nudge theory approaches, which say, put the fruits at the checkout counter, don't put the candy. And that's I think a good tool in the toolbox. I'm just a bit worried about perceptions of paternalism and perceptions of the idea that the system decides for the individual. I think people want what's best for them, and trust in consumers is, I think, is very important. And but you're right. I mean, these tools do exist and they should be used, and they're often not used.
When I like when you mentioned about the nudge theory. As far as I know, I think I learned this just yesterday, that there are nudge units, like nudge committees in the UK itself, where they think of those behavioral aspects of everyday life. So that's
And,
extremely interesting.
and when it's done well, it's great. When it's done badly, it's extremely sinister. So that's why I'm not going to endorse it. But it's a tool, definitely.
Extremely sinister. I'll be doing my research after this. um, so board my time machine, please. I'm pressing 2030. We step out of the machine. We see that Project X Global has crushed its goals. No more environmental problems. So obviously, humans don't fail to disappoint. There will be new environmental problems. What are going to be the environmental problems of the future that we don't know right now? And just to sort of start this riff, waste in space, managing that, all of the things that are floating around, or perhaps the humankind coming up with the brilliant idea to, hey, why don't we take the trash that we have on the planet and put it somewhere around the orbit, being one example.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Nice one. That's probably going to be an issue at some point. Yeah. Actually, if we keep sending as many Starlinks up, then probably, definitely. Is that now? Maybe this is for around a glass of wine, but is that an environmental issue, or is that a over technicalization of society issue? You know, if we're no longer on Earth, can we still be considered Earthlings and environmentalists? But maybe that's to be shelved for next time. I mean, I think. I'm sorry, I'm going to be annoying. First of all, we'll never accomplish sustainability. There'll always be better. I think there'll always be, because sustainability is a concept which literally in its original or in one of its original definitions, because even that's contested, it just means that the next generation can access resources, or this generation accesses resources in a way that doesn't hinder the next generation's ability to access the same resources. So what is a resource? You know, it was fossil fuels for the last 150 years. Maybe it'll be something completely different for the next 150 years. I think I know we're putting an enormous strain on non-renewable resources such as lithium for batteries. There'll be a problem of repurposing spent batteries, definitely, which is probably the cost of short-termist environmentalism. So that's one thing. I think we can always go further in terms of integration of biodiversity into human systems and recognizing that we are one with nature. And maybe to give a tangible answer to your question, maybe one thing that we're overlooking, and maybe from your perspective at Netguru, you can give us a little bit more insight into that. What is the cost of the world going online from an environmental perspective? We have an idea of what data centers are causing us. We all benefit from it hugely, the fact that we're able to have this conversation. So we probably, as a society, assign a price to that, which is quite high. We're quite happy that we have access to these online communities. But I was talking with a designer friend of mine the other day about NFTs and environmental, and digital art, and he was getting extremely excited. He was saying, I've been waiting for this all my life. Finally, my art is recognized. But he also said it really sucks that it uses as much, it emits as much CO2 as the average sized village, or per year, to maintain that code. So, these are questions which didn't exist 8 months ago in the mainstream mind. Will they be the next generations, or in 10 years environmental problems? Maybe.
Okay. So, well, just to answer your question in a less serious manner, I mean, I'll need my cloud experts in the comments section, stat, to answer the question about digital waste and how that's going to be handled. But in all seriousness, very, very true. But I also, if I were to play the devil's advocate here, I would point the attention to whether the cost of onlineization of everybody doesn't have such an ROI that even just for the network effect, or for what would it be without them being online, that would be a potentially bigger impact on the environment. But probably a calculation way above my head at this moment. So happy to park it right here. to B Corp or not to B Corp, I appreciate the fact that you did recognize that we too are a B Corp, just like you guys. Was it impactful on Project X Global's activities? Like, did you ever have, let's say, this recognition of you're talking to somebody, perfect fit, and then the cherry on top, oh, you are a B Corp, how fantastic, let's get things going immediately. Like, what was the impact, if at all? Because of course you can just do the B Corp certification for a reflection of the company's values. It doesn't have to be a mercenary interest that B Corp will open that door or that door, but I'm just curious if it did open any.
Yeah, I mean, I think the choice to become a B Corp for us was very natural. Being kind of incubated within WWF before we became a private company, it was part of our DNA, I guess, and so it made a lot of sense for us to do it. I've got to say, the community is very strong, and we're delighted. I mean, the fact that Netguru and Project X are both B Corps, I think, is probably quite a good example of the not only the spread within the industry, but also the fact that it's a sweetener in terms of this conversation. I'm happy to know that your company is aligned in values to ours, and so it kind of feels like almost a sense of brotherhood, or a sense of community, which I find is important, because sometimes it sucks to be all alone, and it sucks to be telling people do the right thing. And now at least there's like, well, we're not alone. There's a lot of us, and we're trying to get as many people to join. And it's a difficult process, but it's, in my view, what any good business should be doing. It just makes sense, right? And I think we can keep challenging each other to do better every year. It doesn't make sense to be constantly. You can't always be green. You got to be always greener than yesterday, and that's, I think, one of the ways in which we see this as a process, not as a state.
That's a quote. That, along with "we will never achieve sustainability, it's always an uphill climb." That these are quotes for images, I tell you. So, in terms of the B Corp, personally, my experience is that someone doesn't know what a B Corp is, and it feels sometimes a little bit pretentious, like we are a B Corp, or do you know what a B Corp is? Of course. But then when I just mentioned Ben and Jerry's or Patagonia, for them, it's like, all right. So big company. I remember that they have vegan ice cream. I get it. Yeah, that's a typical approach to B Corp from someone who doesn't know it.
Ben and Jerry's is an excellent. Yeah, they're very good people to have next to us, I guess, because they're very tangible and delicious.
Tangible and delicious. Hope Ben and Jerry's will listen to this one later. So, have you seen the potential for the corporations you're accelerating to adopt B Corp-like characteristics? As in, if they go properly through the acceleration, it's silky smooth. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that mean that they immediately should be applying for a B Corp, because the actions that led them to this acceleration also sort of allow them to enter that family, this brotherhood that you mentioned? Yeah,
I mean, that's interesting, because my gut feeling is yes. Is if they wanted to, they should, because of what we've just spoken about. I shy from saying that it should be part of our process, because I think it very much depends on what works for the company. Again, it's, why do you come into this? Why are you acting for the environment within your business? And if you can answer that with yes, because XYZ, then you should be trying to join it. A lot of the companies that we work with are sort of early stage tech companies. It's a resource intensive process. I wouldn't expect a startup in its early days to be a B Corp. You probably have better stuff to do, which is actually developing your offering or your product. But it should be an aspirational goal, yeah. And it is exciting. You mentioned Ben and Jerry's, you mentioned Patagonia. It is exciting that large corporates, larger than Ben and Jerry's and Patagonia, are touching it and are thinking this can work for us too. So I think that's a good reflection of being sufficiently specific, but also sufficiently broad for it to attract a big amount of people.
Especially from what I heard, Patagonia is doing it like really counter revenue, in the sense that they said that they will not produce anymore, and they will simply take back the things that they have already produced and reutilize that, which is like putting a ceiling on a business. That's that's like the real life commitment. That's nothing more than walking the talk than this could be. And just like you said, I mean, eventually I see a world in which, well, B Corp stops being a valid certificate because no company would be able to afford not being B Corp like. Let's say 2030, I think if you're not sustainable, you're just not going to be competitive. And even if, once again, we just apply the mercenary framework of, I just want to be a capitalist, I just want to make as much money. If you're not going to be, let's say, sexy with being sustainable to your consumers, especially in a direct-to-consumer business, they're just going to hate you. They're just going to say, listen, like everybody's doing it and you're the odd one out. This isn't anymore that you get to wear this like a badge of pride. This is, you are the last one standing.
That's the challenge of the kind of the challenge of the early adopter, or the challenge of the label in a sense, is once everybody has it, who has it? And that's why I think this constant moving target is very important. You always do better, and so you should be recognized on your progress. Obviously, that progress needs to hit certain targets, because otherwise, if you're always doing better but you're really, really crap anyway, then you're not going to go very far.
Oh yeah. It's not the intent that counts. You can't fool us. We need to see results.
Exactly. And I mean, to come to this point of capping a business, it's radical, right? It's very radical. But we need to recognize that we live in a world of finite resources. Why is money considered infinite? Why is it considered something that can grow forever? And I'm not an advocate of degrowth, but I'm an advocate of looking at growth in a very different way, and looking at values generated, values shared, values that are recognized and that are diverse. I mean, so a company that says we're going to stop this and we're going to start this makes sense. Sorry, it's not very quotable, but
we can do a screen grab. A couple of seconds. Okay. Some general thoughts right now. Sure. This doesn't have to be constrained by Mava Foundation or by Project X Global. If so, be it. That's up to you. But it's a very general question. Your decision-making framework, like your rule of thumb for any major decisions in your life. Of course, we're not looking for super personal decisions. However, I feel that what is personal for you is a direct reflection of what you do in the corporate world. So if you could just share either specific, either generic, that's completely up to you. But something that helps you guide through any bigger internal debate that you need to give a yes or a no to.
Wow.
No pressure.
No pressure. No, I think I'm going to come back to a few of the different kind of values that have come up over our conversation today. I mean, one of them is recognizing plurality, recognizing there are many different opinions. The other one, I think, is understanding why people do things. And the two in combination means that I think a decision needs to be, or the way I tend to look at these things is, how can you inform your decision from a lot of different viewpoints, which can help you move forward in a more decisive way. I think accelerators. A lot of what we do on a daily basis is think about how can we move this forward in a way that cannot be overturned faster, and doing that means you need to build every decision on strong foundations. So there is, of course, a certain mentality of fail fast. You need to try, you need to iterate, but each iteration does need to be built on solid scientific inputs to remove, maybe paradoxically, the emotional argument. The reason you're there is what drives you. It's your values, it's your emotions. The reason you decide what to do has to be built, I think, on sound reasoning. So maybe that's on the spot what I would answer, but I'll think about that. Thank you.
No, but that's a toughie, and nicely done. Nicely done, really, because well, it is the paradox. Like, what do I care about? How do I make sure that me caring doesn't get in the way of showing that I care?
Yeah,
that's it. All right. So
That's, removing yourself from the equation. Yeah, that's yeah.
Even though you're looking at what happens after the equal sign. So,
Yeah.
oh, the trials and tribulations of the human mind. The last question from me before I jump into the comments. I am handing you over a magic wand. You take that magic wand and abracadabra, every 12-year-old in the world is taught something.
Yeah.
And by the time that they're 22, let's say, what would you want them to have? What kind of skill would you like to see? Not exactly just when they hit 22, but from the lessons that they would learn at 12. We've heard financial prudence. We've heard coding, of course. We've heard systems thinking. We've heard design thinking. And of course, you can make something similar to that. You can make it specific. Just make it yours and tell me why that is the answer.
I'm going to bounce off, riff off the last question. It's, I think, knowledge of self. Understanding that you can't know, and understanding that there is for the 12-year-old, there is a complex world, and you need to be able to, I guess, have a critical eye about what's around you. And I think so much misinformation exists in the world, and so much battle for your eyes and for your wallet and for your time. I think it's a really powerful tool for a child growing up in today's world, is to figure out, well, okay, who am I within this, and what am I represented? And then I reckon the by the time you're 22, it's figuring out, who am I within this system. I'm one among many. I'm powerful as an individual, and that's very difficult. And for the moment, that's still very much influenced by who you are, how you grew up, where you are, and that sucks. It should just be about who you are, not about the stuff around you. So maybe that's my message on this 20th of April, 2021.
Yes, exactly. I actually have a Harvard Business Review book just on emotional intelligence over here. So I guess that would be it. And also some theory of knowledge. So how do you know what you know, and how do you know that it's true? Right. So that sort of self-awareness. We are closing in on the hour, so we should be wrapping up soon. But let's entertain that question from the audience. Slightly spiky. I feel like we slightly spoke about this, but let's handle this. How do you ensure that the companies that are accelerated do not do it for greenwashing purposes? Because I will build on that question from Zofia. Zofia, thanks for asking that. Of course, I am able to pass your acceptance criteria.
Yeah.
I am able to perhaps not lie, because I don't think anybody would go into the lying process just for that, to say we pretend and be a great actor and just fool you. But have you had any experiences with identifying, for example, something like, it looks legit on the face of it, but the reason why they're doing it is they just want to look good, whilst somewhere else in the world there exists 10 things that just make it worse?
Yeah. So thanks, Sophia, for the question. I mean, it's a big problem in our industry. There are many different ways, I think, that you can counter it. I think the first one is to be, I guess, aware that people will engage for these purposes. How do you ensure that the companies that are accelerated do not do it for greenwashing purposes? That's a question of intentionality. And I think the issue isn't why they're doing it. The issue is the outcomes. So if they're doing it for greenwashing purposes, does that mean that it's actually only for an advertising campaign and there's nothing behind it? In which case, there's no way we could work with them, because the way we work is with our 6 lenses. We dig into the value chain. We dig into how is the impact of what we're, of the solutions we're proposing, but also what is the nature of the problem that they're trying to address. And if we see that the nature of the problem is just about, getting a front page newspaper article, but actually that it isn't a tangible physical thing in their value chain, it's just completely exclusionary. That's because our core business is working with tangible in the value chain. Now, how do we protect ourselves from falling into a situation? Measurement, monitoring, working with science, working with experts from different fields. So tailoring our solution to the problem. And that really means that we cannot move forward in a world where we're working with partners who are greenwashing. So yeah, that's how I guess we mitigate that risk. But that is a real risk, and I'm glad you brought it up, because maybe sometimes we're worried about, nobody wants their job to be done for no use, and even worse when we say that we're changing the world for the better, right? So it's important that we address that. I hope I answered your question.
For me, it did. Zofia, by proxy, it just had to answer it for you as well, because you have no voice unless we hear you in the comments. And yeah, I guess, I mean, even if your intentions are bad, but the results are exactly what was expected, then I guess fair game. Like, you play only yourself if your intentions were impure, but the outcomes are.
Well, and to come back to this idea that the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are urgent, and that we're, running out of time on the clock, the only thing we should care about is the outcomes. No, the only thing that'll get us there is the intention, but it's only the outcomes that we should be judged on. And when we're on a fireball and there's 4 degrees plus in 10 years, if that happens, which I hope it doesn't, then, that's what matters.
Exactly. Reporting here from a country that decides every day whether it's going to be sunny 20 degrees or snow at 8 degrees. So there's urgency, all right. A question from Mr. Faber. I don't want to mispronounce your name, so allow me to say Mr. Faber. What do you think of crowdfunding companies like Time for the Planet that also want to change the world?
Excellent. Thank you, Grégoire. Yeah, so I don't actually know Time for the Planet, but I can talk about crowdfunding in general and about how they're a very powerful tool to work with people. It comes, again, humanizing this transition. Crowdfunding is a way for the crowd to fund. It's a way for people to buy in, quite literally, to a project. And I'm very happy to see more and more platforms engaging in environmentalism and realizing that the power they have in getting people to reach into their pocket and to say, we will support a mission-driven business. So I think there's definitely a lot of exciting opportunities within crowdfunding. There are a few examples of companies who've truly revolutionized industries. I'm thinking particularly about BrewDog, which is a big brewery founded in Scotland. They crowdfunded their equity from the beginning, before many of the crowdfunding platforms existed. I think it was founded 2012, maybe it was 2007, I'm not sure. But by allowing their community to buy in, they remained independent. They're now a BCorp, they're now a carbon neutral company. They produce, I think, the only carbon negative beer in the world. And they figured out a niche to be a really strong advocate for the planet in a different way. And I'm fairly confident that if they didn't have this independent spirit and strong community behind them, they wouldn't have managed that. And that community crystallized because they became shareholders. And maybe to come back to BCorp, stakeholder capitalism, allow people to be part of your decision making, allow people to join into the business and to share their view. The concept of a shareholding is precisely that. Now, the issue is fiduciary duty, and the issue is having to beat last year's dividend every year, which drives us towards this exponential growth, which we spoke about before, which has limits on a physical world. But actually allowing people to buy into a business and to be active shareholders is incredibly valuable. So yeah, I think crowdfunding has a big role in getting economies to work more for the people rather than for the system.
I just Googled really quickly Time for the Planet. The point is we are fundraising 1 billion euros to create 100 companies fighting against global warming. So interesting. You can buy shares. So let's check that out later. And in the meantime, what I have to say about that is, well, companies oftentimes tell you, take ownership, give me some, right? Just give me some, right? Then I can own it and we can make some choices together. All right. So we are just about to hit the hour mark, so we have to be wrapping up. So 2 things. Frederic, thank you so much for today. I feel much smarter than I did 59 minutes ago. So thanks for that. Hopefully everybody in the audience mirrors that impression. And what else? Well, you mentioned that we should continue this on a slightly philosophical note over a glass. I propose a bottle once we get back to some normality. I'm coming to to London. Is it right now? And then we can just relive again, right? So thanks so much for today. It's been a blast.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.